All right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming to the session. I'm Shashank Gandhi. I'm a program manager for Microsoft Visio. And today we'll be talking about how you can leverage Microsoft Excel, Visio, and Flow to document and execute your business processes automatically in a more data-driven and agile fashion. So I'll walk you through Data Visualizer for process maps, which enables you to automatically create your business process workflows by capturing the process definition in Excel. And then I'll talk about how you can take your existing workflows created with BPMN notations in Visio and mark up the diagrams with flow connectors and export it and execute it in Flow. So I'll have a bunch of demos for you throughout the presentation. So first of all, let's get started with the new way to design your process maps. It's called Data Visualizer, wherein you can use our pre-made Excel sample templates, or you can bring in your own process data. So imagine capturing your process definition in Excel with each row identifying an activity in your process, and you're defining all the connections in Excel, all the dependencies, the functions which perform each of the tasks, and then you can export it to Visio, and you can create templates for your organization using stencils of your choice. You can use the flowchart shapes, the BPMN notations, or your own custom stencils. And we allow you to keep your diagram and the data in sync, which means that it's a two-way sync between the data and the diagram. So if your data gets modified, you can push the changes to Visio. And if you make visual changes right in the diagram, you can take it back to the data. And of course, we want to promote standardization of the creation of these diagrams, so you can create templates for your organization, which are kind of coupled pairs of data templates in Excel and Visio templates, which you can distribute in your organization for people to map the processes in a standardized way. So let me quickly show you a demo. So if you go to Excel, we have some pre-made templates in Excel which allow you to capture your process definition. There are two of these right now. One is to capture process definition for basic flowcharts, and the other one is to do it for cross-functional flowcharts. I have a pre-populated template, so I will just switch to that. So the example you see on screen is an HR scenario for a new employee onboarding. It starts with the new hire getting added to a SharePoint list, and then an approval workflow gets triggered, and then once the manager approves the joining of the new hire in a particular department, there is a meeting which gets set up automatically, and there is an email which goes to the hiring manager and the employee. But the key to notice here is that we're allowing you to capture your activities in a data-driven fashion. So you have your ID for each of the activities, the description, and the next step ID, and which captures the dependencies of the process. It could either be a next step or a previous step, depending on the choice you make. If it's a decision box which has multiple branches, you can capture the definition in a comma-separated way, and of course, you can call out the different parts of the process. And this one is a BPMN template where I have notations which can be used to define the shapes as they would appear in Visio. And finally, you can specify each activity is performed by which function in the organization and in which phase. So this is a single phase process, so all of it's onboarding. But if you have multiple phases, you can even capture that. Now, what I'm going to do is that I'm going to export this template to Visio. And keep in mind, you do not have to use the out-of-box template. You can, okay, I just need to save it once. You can get in your own data. You can create your own templates. It's a short session, so I'm not covering all those aspects. But if you want to learn more about that, we have a booth where I can help you understand how you can do that. So I exported it to Visio, and it's now automatically trying to create the entire workflow by understanding the definition in Excel. So let me just close this right here and make some space. So as you can see, the workflow was automatically created using BPMN notations. And since I use my own template, the title for the workflow automatically got populated. All the functions are created as per the definition in Excel. So this makes it more agile and more data-driven. And of course, like I mentioned earlier, the data and diagram are associated in a two-way sync. So if something changes in Excel, you use refresh to get the changes from Excel into Visio. If you make changes in Visio, you can push it back to Excel. And we support all sort of changes. For example, you could add new shapes, you could modify the existing activities, you could move your shapes from one swim lane to another swim lane if the responsibilities change, and all of this can be kept in sync. Now, moving back to my presentation, so far I've tried to cover how you can map your business processes in a more agile and data-driven way. Now let's have a look how you can take the business process workflow captured in Visio to Microsoft Flow, where it actually gets executed. So this is a new feature that we are working on, and it's currently available to insiders to try out. So this is, if you're familiar with the SharePoint Workflow Designer in Visio, this is kind of a spiritual successor to that feature, where you can capture your workflow definition using BPMN shapes in Visio, and then you can take your existing BPMN diagrams, and then we support marking up your diagram by adding flow connectors, which helps you specify how the Microsoft Flow will be created. It will be much more clear when I show you the demo, and you can use the out-of-box Visio shapes to capture the business process flow, and then we have a set of input triggers and actions and connectors which you can apply to the diagram. And of course, we support, Visio supports collaboration, so this makes capturing huge flows which have complex branching easily in an intuitive drag and drop fashion, which you can share with your peers who can review it before you actually create the flow in the flow application. So here's a glimpse of how it works. The BPMN diagram is just like your standard workflow, which you would create in Visio. And the diagram below it has certain callouts, as you see. Those callouts are the connectors, the triggers, the actions that you would mark on your diagram. And then finally, the third step is where you export it to Flow. In step 2, you're actually creating a structure for your flow. The final parameters to your flow you have to capture when you export it to Flow directly. So let's have a look at the demo. So before I go to the demo, I just want to highlight the entry points to the feature. So you can start creating the SharePoint workflow as a BPMN diagram from Microsoft Flow application directly. There is a Create from Flow Visio diagram option under the New tab in Flow. You can also go to the templates in Flow, where we have a bunch of templates which can help you getting started. So these are sample workflows created using BPMN notations in Visio, which can help you understand how to capture your business workflow using Visio notations in a fast and easy manner. So let me switch to the demo. Right. So I'll take a minute and go back to the diagram that we had created. Okay, I think, yeah, there it is. So imagine, again, the HR scenario for Contoso employee onboarding, where you have 3 functions in an organization, the HR, the business, and of course the employee, who is the new hire. And this workflow captures what happens when a new employee is hired and the HR professional and the admin is managing the employee's onboarding. So imagine all of the employee data getting captured in a SharePoint list. Really sorry for the resolution. Looks like it's not. Oh, it's better now. Right. So imagine the employee database being captured as a SharePoint list, where all of the employees who get added, who get hired, get captured in the SharePoint list with the employee ID, the employee name, the title, the manager ID, and so on and so forth. Now, the workflow actually calls out that when a new item is added in the SharePoint list, you need to get the item details, and then you need to check the department for the employee, and accordingly a workflow gets triggered. So if the department is allocated, which is this path, then you start and wait for an approval from the department head, who would approve that yes, this employee would join my department, and accordingly if the approval status is accepted, we would go and update the list in SharePoint. And if it's rejected, we would send a notification to HR. And then, of course, in the case all the approvals are accepted, we send an onboarding mail to the employee. And then imagine an admin who is managing the organization structure for this Contoso company is maintaining an Excel file. Now, this admin need not have access to entire SharePoint list, but this workflow triggers the update of an Excel file which captures the employee data. So for example, this would be the Excel file which captures the employee data. Now, each time a new employee gets added to the SharePoint list, the workflow would trigger, and if it's approved, it would update this Excel file, which a separate admin is managing. What's interesting is that we have a new add-in in Excel where you can visualize this organization structure as a diagram within Excel. So each time a new employee gets hired, in the end, this diagram gets updated. So that's the entire workflow which will be automated, starting from the workflow in Visio and exporting it to Flow. So let's have a look how you can do that. So we have these two buttons here right in the process tab, which help you mark up your diagram to create the flow in the Flow application. So first of all, you need to click Prepare to Export. So it identifies that there is a trigger in your workflow, and then you can go ahead and mark what kind of triggers and actions from Flow would you like to apply to this particular shape. So in the Triggers and Actions tab, I'll give it a moment to load. Yeah, so this is where you can search for all the connections and triggers that are available in Microsoft Flow and apply it to each of the steps of your workflow. So for example, in this case, this workflow starts with that SharePoint list. So I need to go and look for a SharePoint trigger when a new item gets added to a list. So I can either search for it, let me just scroll through it, or I'll just go ahead and filter it by SharePoint. Right, so these are all the available triggers. So I can see that there is one trigger which says, which is when an item is created. So I'll go ahead and apply this to my diagram. Sorry. Yeah. Similarly, I can go and apply all of the connectors to each of the steps. For example, this one would be another connector. So I'll just switch to the final diagram where I have applied all these connectors. So as you can see, this one has, each of the shape has some of the other connector applied. For example, this one right here is getting the item details. So this is again a SharePoint connector, which gets the item details from a SharePoint list. And then this one is an Outlook connector to send the email to HR. And if I go ahead, there are a variety of connectors that has been applied to the diagram. This one right here is an approval connector, which is applied to this particular shape when the approval starts. And finally, when the Excel needs to be updated, I'm using an Excel connector to go and update that Excel file, which is residing on a SharePoint library. So once I'm done with all of the connectors and it's applied to the diagram, I just need to click on refresh. So it validates my flow. This section of the pane that you see right here helps you map your flow to help Visio understand what would the definition look like. So Visio detected the trigger automatically, and if you have any kind of gateway which has branchings, you can use the map conditions section to call out what are your yes and no paths in the gateway. So then Visio understands the meaning of your workflow. And this section right here will point out if there are any issues which are part of your workflow, and then you can correct those issues. This diagram currently has no issues, so it's good to go, and I can just hit export to Flow. So it automatically picked up a name for the flow from the Visio file, and it's signing me in. And then I can just assign any name right here to my workflow and hit on create flow. It's now actually creating the workflow in Microsoft Flow, and once it's done, you can click on this link, and it'll take you to the Flow app directly. So there you go. This is the workflow that was created. I can hit edit to complete my workflow, because so far what I've done is that, again, just a quick recap. I started with Excel to capture my workflow definition. I created my diagram, and then I used the flow markups to define how the flow would look like. So I have the structure in place, and now I have to complete the flow once I am in the flow application. So this is where I can enter all the metadata, which kind of is like which is the SharePoint site and what's the list name and all that. In the interest of time, I'm not completing this one, but you can see that all of that diagram has now created this huge flow in the flow application. If you have a very complex flow, this interface tends to get a bit complex because of the branchings, but with the Visio diagram, it's very intuitive and you understand how the workflow definition looks like. You can even use Visio Online to share this with your colleagues, who can then review it before you create the flow definition in Microsoft Flow. And once the flow is all set, I already have a flow which was created earlier, so I can just go ahead and click new right here. So assume a new employee got hired, and I just need to add the detail for the new employee. So let's say I just add the detail for the new employee. So I'll say Megan Bowen, and oh sorry, this was the ID. So I just give an ID and I just write a name. Let's say I just give a title for the employee and a manager ID, the department for the employee, and let's say I type in my own email ID in the manager ID field, and another one in the employee ID field. So what's going to happen is that as soon as the new item gets added, the workflow gets triggered, because the starting point of the workflow said each time a new item gets added to the SharePoint list, the workflow should execute. And what it does is that it sends me an email, because I'm the manager in the email ID, for an approval for the new employee. It goes and updates. Once I approve it, it goes and sends a mail to the employee and sets up a meeting with the hiring manager. And then finally, it goes and updates that Excel file where another persona, who is the admin, is maintaining the org chart for the employee, for the organization. So I'll just switch back to my deck. So this is what we have so far in terms of creation of flow from the Visio diagrams. What we're also working on is that, assume that you already have created your workflows in Microsoft Flow. What if you want to visualize those workflows in a flowchart fashion, so that it's intuitive to understand? Maybe you're modifying an existing workflow, maybe you are giving it to the business to review how they look like. So you can take your existing flows and export them to a Visio diagram. It's currently under development and will be available in the near future. What you saw today is already available to try out in for Office Insiders, but you need Visio Online Plan 2 for this, which is the subscription plan for Visio. So if you want to learn more and stay connected with us, these are the channels where you can reach out to us. You can reach out to us directly on either of these channels, or you can write to us at the email ID below, which is tellvisio@microsoft.com. And with that, I would open the floor for some questions. So I guess we have a couple of minutes. Oh, sorry, I'll just put it back up again, and if there are any questions, I can take them now. Yep. Right, so great question. So for the audience, I think your question is that how do you measure execution time for each of the workflow steps, and how can you monitor it in a certain way? So you can, I think Flow gives you the run status for each of your workflows, where you can see the execution time for all the steps. And Visio connects to a variety of data sources like Excel, SharePoint, or databases. So if you can take the execution data from Flow and export it to, let's say, Excel, then you can connect your Excel data to the Visio diagram. And what you can do is that you can overlay that data on top of each of the shapes. So imagine certain callouts appearing on top of each of the shapes, which tell you that, okay, this step took 5 seconds to execute. And it can be a widget on top of each of the shapes inside of Visio. And Visio now integrates with Power BI. So if your execution data is being pulled into a Power BI dashboard, then you can embed your workflow, which is the one you saw, that Visio diagram, and take it into Power BI. And then you can connect it to Power BI data. And then all of your execution data can be shown on top of the Visio shapes in terms of an active dashboard. Do we have any other question? All right, go ahead. Yeah. Okay, so the question is, what if I have already created a workflow and I have multiple instances of the workflow running, and then I make a change, so will it impact the earlier instances? So currently, the diagram and the flow are not linked in any way. It's like you create a diagram, you export it to a flow, so it's an independent flow. So each time you make a change, a new workflow gets created in Microsoft Flow. However, we would like to understand if you would like to keep your Visio workflow and the Microsoft Flow, your asset linked together, or would you like to have it separate? So that's something we would like to learn from the users. All right then, thank you so much for attending this session. I hope it was worth your time. Thank you.